Hi, it's Kirby Summers. It is Sunday, January 19th, 2025. And what I wanted to do today is because there have been some interesting developments in the Sean Combs case, is that I wanted to sort of explain that to you. And what I did was I went back and I looked at R. Kelly's case. And R. Kelly was, in fact, acquitted. I'm not sure if you remember, but he was. And so, is there a chance that Sean Combs might also be acquitted? Well, let's go over the information and let's see what may or may not happen. In the meanwhile, I want to thank those of you who are new to my channel. I seem to be getting a lot of new subscribers. I want to thank those of you who take the time to like the podcast. But I also want to say that for people who are posting things that are um, unkind, I do block. Just an FYI. I am sure that my channel and my information is looked at in the same way that perhaps all of my content has been looked at even before I started working on the Epstein case, and that is through people hired by my abuser in order to distract from my work. So just an FYI, don't bother because I then really block you from being able to see anything on my YouTube channel. And I'm only giving you a heads up because I don't mind if I have to hire someone to get rid of all of the lurkers and the very likely spies. And I have to use the word spies because if you're here just to listen to what I have to say so that you can write anything that might be somewhat off, well then, I'm just going to get rid of you. So if you have something that you want to say, I'm going to give you some tips. So for example, I have hundreds of videos, right? I can't really remember from one year to the next what I have said in any specific video, but a lot of the comments that sometimes I don't read or sometimes just get rid of and basically sometimes just block the person from seeing things again are things that I don't understand. So if you're going to leave a comment, I appreciate that, number one. But two, because I work all the time and I have new information coming in and sharing with you guys all the time. It would be helpful for full sentences, whatever comment you have related to the information that you are responding to, so that quickly I can understand what you're saying. And it might even lead to my ability to answering your question. If, however, you're going to be very vague and write something that is almost, in my opinion, threatening, I have no other option but to either remove the comment and or remove the person entirely. You have to remember, I am a survivor of this group, and the group includes the people that are above Sean Combs. It includes the people that were above the Jeff case. It includes, for me, when I look at all of these cases, they are not one-offs. I'm not mainstream media. For me, they're not one-offs. So for me, I look at the commentary and I have to make a sort of like a gut decision. Is this person listening to my things for an ulterior motive? And or are we all here on the same page? Because ultimately, I only want people that are here on the same page. We're looking to out the people that are not on our side. And really, I'm not really that interested in giving ammunition or giving time or space on my channel to people whose goal is to destroy me or block my work in any way. So just, don't bother because you won't be here longer than the end of the period that you add to your sentence should you say something on my channel that I find somewhat unusual. Okay, guys, that said, to everyone else, welcome, welcome, welcome. So here's the thing. There's a little difference in the R. Kelly case and in the Sean Combs case. So in the R. Kelly case, he was accused of the minor situation, okay? But in the Sean Combs case, he was not accused of that. In the Sean Combs case, and I've got a couple of pages here. So let me just say that Combs is 55. He's now locked up at Brooklyn's kind of infamous Metropolitan Detention Center. He was arrested on September 16, 2024, and indicted on racketeering and STR ficking, okay, charges. Now, however, Kelly's case, following his arrest of 2019 and subsequent convictions, were on federal racketeering and ST charges, right? Involving the abuse of, people of non-consent. However, so there are differences here. So again, to reiterate what I think I've said several times, in Sean Combs' case, the lawsuits that do indicate similar behavior pattern as R. Kelly are lawsuits. They are not part of the federal indictment. Now, what's happened in the federal case is that Combs' attorneys are insisting that the government give them the so-called freak-off tapes for their review, right? Because they are claiming that victim one, who we can only conclude is Cassie Ventura, is, quote, thoroughly enjoying herself, and there's nothing to suggest that she was coerced or anything like that. And so the attorneys are claiming that whatever is on the tapes is going to, in fact, help Sean Combs, because all of this is just consensual adults and that there's no problem. Now, the reason they're asking for these tapes is that because they haven't really had full access, right? So they've only been able to view the tapes at the prosecutor's office. So they do have sort of like a valid point in that since they've only seen the footage twice since Combs was sent to jail, they're claiming that, well, it's kind of not fair. They're putting forward sort of the Brady defense. Now, the Brady defense, I'm going to like sort of read to you what the Brady defense is. In the legal system, the Brady disclosure consists of information and evidence that is material to the guilt or innocence or of the person who is going to be punished, in this case, Sean Combs. And it means that it sort of comes from a 1963 U.S. Supreme Court case, Brady versus Maryland, in which the Supreme Court ruled that suppression by the prosecution of evidence favorable to the defendant who has requested it violates due process. So that is basically what they're saying, that if the court denies them to have the videos themselves, a copy of the videos that they can review and basically have their experts review, right? Because maybe to the naked eye, if you look at a video one way, someone is going to interpret it in a certain manner, versus if they have their experts review it and maybe go back and look at other portions and look at it again and look for things that maybe the naked eye can't pick up. Well, that's important. And so in this particular instance, the judge does seem to be very fair-minded. I believe the judge is going to allow them to have a copy of the tapes. Now, should this case go to trial, and there's a very good chance that it may go to trial, because when I was sort of reacquainting myself with R. Kelly's case, it went to trial. However, his first trial, he was acquitted. So the fact that he was acquitted could make us look at the Sean Combs case differently. The only possibility that, let's say, Sean Combs might be found not guilty would be if the main witnesses are so afraid for their lives, because that's exactly what happened in the R. Kelly case, that they refuse to tell the truth while on the stand. So basically to perjure themselves. Now, I will tell you that I was privy to the trial of Ghislaine Maxwell, and I heard people perjure themselves. Moreover, I heard the prosecuting attorneys not push and not ask proper questions. So not every time something is, let's say, in a court of law, even if it's, let's say, in front of a jury, as is the case in the Combs situation, where it's a jury trial scheduled for May of this year, but possibly will be delayed. However, in the R. Kelly case, it was also in front of a jury. And he had many, many issues. So basically, he had already faced repeated accusations of SA for incidents beginning in 1991 all the way through to 2018. And he had been, frankly, the Chicago Sun-Times, he had been sort of like under the microscope for that, a couple of the reporters there. And because he had been tried in multiple civil lawsuits, couple of criminal trials, starting in 1996, when Tiffany Hawkins alleged that starting in 1991, when she was 15, Kelly, 24, had SA'd her, right? And then encouraged her to bring her friends. Now, there were some leaked video recordings. Now, in the case against Combs, a lot of the information that has been retrieved are the Cassie Ventura tapes. And it is probably very likely that Ventura's own people had that leaked, because she too has been afraid. I was afraid when I was somebody's mere toy. I'm going to use that because I can't use the actual terminology on this platform. I was afraid for my life. In fact, I'm going to tell you now something that I've never told anyone before. There were 2 unalivements in my family during that time. And that happens. It happens to keep you scared and compliant and in place, kind of frozen, so you don't move forward, because these unalivements are sent as a way to let you know, well, we can do that to you. And in my case, they tried 3 times. I was very lucky. Well, actually 4, right? Because I gave you guys the 4th time in one of my recent podcasts. So again, we think that the information that the government is looking at are the Cassie Ventura tapes. However, I think what they're trying to then perhaps say in in Sean Combs' case, is that these were not on his recording devices. However, we'll get to that at some other point. I want to review what happened in the R. Kelly cases and how he was found not guilty, because that's still a possibility, believe it or not, in the Sean Combs case. Now, in the Kelly case, we didn't have the possession of all that weapon free, right? We didn't have that. So that alone is a big deal. So there are several factors in the Sean Combs case, but again, we're not dealing necessarily with a system that is set up properly from what I have been able to determine. So that's my opinion. So again, in 1996, Tiffany Hawkins alleged that starting in 1991, when she was 15, Kelly, who was then 24, had SA and encouraged her to bring her underage friends. So that's a pattern we see over and over again. And then, following these leaked video recordings, Kelly was prosecuted on charges of having uh, a child, let's say, things that are recorded, and you're not supposed to have that because that's illegal. Okay, so CP. All right, it's CP. He was found to have CP, so he was, in fact, prosecuted on CP charges in 2002. So it was like a very controversial trial that ended in, it only ended in 2008. So it took 6 years to make it through. It took 6 whole years. Now, the reason it took 6 years is because the girl was, she was very at a very young and naive time in her life. And of course, when she was, you can say when she was traumatized and when she was lured into this unusual relationship, R. Kelly would have said things to her like, I love you. He would have lied to her the way that these men who are of this nature lie to the victims, right? You're the one and only. They make them believe they're important, that they're special. And coming from perhaps a background or a life where no one said to her or many victims who hear for the first time, you're special, blah, blah, well, then you begin to have feelings for the person who is actually taking advantage of you. So that's what was happening in the R. Kelly case. So, so it's a 27-minute tape, and it shows a man who looks very much like R. Kelly giving money to, SAing, and doing something that you should only do, let's say, in a urinal to this young, of not consent female. Looks like this girl, who would have been around 14, 15 at the time. And it takes place in a log cabin style sauna room that looks just like R. Kelly's log cabin style sauna room. So you've got, that's not me, that's somebody's, somebody doctored the video. So you can expect all of that to happen too, that they're going to claim that these are doctor tapes because that's what happened in the R. Kelly case. All right. Or I was framed. These are just money grubbing people. That's also been said, right? We've heard that in the Sean Combs case to date, right? Oh, these are people just looking for money, just looking for a pay date. And then the what happened was that the girl, at the time that the case was being heard and when R. Kelly was acquitted back in, I believe, 2008, 15 of her friends and relatives testified that, in fact, it was her. She was at the time 23, so still pretty young. You know, your mind doesn't really reach full maturity until you're 25. From the time you're a child, you don't reach full maturity until 25. That is the brain. That is how it works. So even though 15 of her friends and relatives testified that, in fact, the girl on the video was her, she did not show up in court. Her parents did not show up in court to testify for either side. So, based on the fact, the jury was forced to say that they really had, there was a lack of evidence, that the tape was never going to be enough. Listen to that. They had a videotape, but it wasn't going to be enough because without the testimony of the girl who was supposed to have been the state's star witness, whatever the prosecution gained by calling what they saw on tape this or this or this or that, what the attorneys did was they, let's say the state's attorney, so the prosecution, they found themselves having to explain away their witnesses' character flaws, right? Her own relationships with two men convicted of federal bank fraud. So they went into the victim's life as later in after the so-called relationship, and I'm using quotes around that, okay, because a coerced relationship, one based on threats and other things, is not necessarily a quote relationship. But then they talked about her choices in life of having then been involved with two men who had been convicted of federal bank fraud, her admission that she in fact had stolen R. Kelly's watch, which was a Rolex, an alleged attempt to solicit a bribe from the defense's private investigator, so that they actually just went in on the girl who is in fact the victim, who was supposed to be the star witness. And so, however, the girl was not strong enough to appear to defend herself, because all she really would have had to say is that, yes, I am the girl in that video. But she wasn't there, and therefore that's why the prosecution then went in on her. She's not there to defend herself. She's not there to say one thing or the other, right? Um, so she was not a cooperating victim. And what happened then is that it created doubt in the jury's mind. And if the jury has a doubt, then you know that they're going to basically say that nothing happened. I mean, if there's a doubt, if you remember the OJ case, right? They got to then just say that they are not going to be able to acquit him. Now then, the fact, was he acquitted because he was a celebrity? There's a lot of that too, because in the court there were a lot of his fans who were sending him, little love signs with their hands. And I mean, there is something about celebrity, the fact that he was a global superstar. And perhaps the jurors also were swayed by his star power. I mean, he was really well known, not just in the rap industry, but he was well known as, R&B. He was just known to many more people, I believe, than even Sean Combs, because Combs is known in the rap industry. R. Kelly, I believe, had a much broader base. However, they decided, hey, we're not going to acquit, we're not going to put him away. Now then, what happened was that the documentary was made. And so the 2019 documentary, Surviving R. Kelly, kind of re-examined all of the allegations that were brought against him. What happened to then RCA, they terminated his contract. They just did not want anything to do with the bad publicity. Now we see that the liquor company that Sean Combs had a contract with, oh, okay, there was a dispute there. And okay, and people believe that that's the reason that he was then removed, let's say, from the group. It may or may not be. What we really have to look at is what's going to happen if he survives and goes before a judge and this actually happens in court. That's why I decided to go back and review the R. Kelly case, because it wasn't until the this, documentary that then in 2021 there was an additional conviction for violations of the Mann Act and Racketeer Influence and Corruptions Act, and then the 2022 conviction for production of CP. And then, as of 2023, we know that R. Kelly is now serving a 31-year combined sentence at FCI Butner Medium 1, right? Um, so as of July 30th, 2024, so just half a year ago, 6 months ago, almost, multiple news outlets reported that Kelly, with his lawyer, Jennifer Bonjean, had requested that the Supreme Court review his CP case, which could potentially drop 20 years off his case. So I guess, that brings us back to Sean, Diddy, Puffy, Combs, Love, whatever. Again, anything can happen. If, in fact, Cassie Ventura is the number one, the number one person that the prosecution is depending on. Now, she did bring, as we all know, a civil lawsuit against Sean Combs, which was very quickly settled one day later. So Combs clearly was afraid of what would happen should this go any further, and was very likely instructed by his legal team, settle this immediately. So she wasn't afraid of bringing that lawsuit. So we have to hope that she remains unafraid. However, we do not know what else is happening. I've just told you that two of my relatives were unalived. And I'll tell you when that happened. It began when I began to seek legal counsel. When I began to seek legal counsel, that's when that started to happen. So could it be happening in Cassie Ventura's life? She would not probably say that because of fear that perhaps other members of her family might be targeted. She probably is safe herself at this moment in time. Cases like this, people who do step forward against somebody who's very powerful, and we know that this leads to Clive Davis, and I have told you before that this leads to the three-letter agency, and then that above that, there are other very important individuals who, in fact, use that three-letter agency. It was created by them, for them, not for us, for them. And so what typically happens is they will wait. They can wait, 5 months, 5 years, 20 years, whatever, and they'll eventually, if you have done someone that is under their protection enough harm, they will come and get you. That will happen. Well, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what I have said today. Do you think that Sean Combs will, in fact, be brought to, quote, justice in this, if it goes to trial? And again, we have to say if, right? Because we saw in the Epi case that didn't go to trial. And I will be doing another podcast about that specific thing because I have some inside information that I'm sure nobody else has ever discussed. Um, but I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are as far as if this case goes to trial, will Combs, like the case that I just described to you, all right, will that, like R. Kelly, be dropped? If possibly their number one victim, if it actually is Cassie Ventura, if she decides to then either not show up or perhaps perjure herself on the stand, which then removes that as their basically their primary weapon, let's call it a weapon, their arsenal, what they have in trying to put Sean Combs away. All right, guys, give this a like and subscribe. Thank you. Bye.